3. In 2014, Rabbi Kirshbaum helped to found Women Wage Peace, which has become the largest grassroots Israeli peace organization. And I know we're going to be hearing a lot more about it tonight, but I will say that they have been nominated officially twice for the Nobel Prize, along with their Palestinian sister organization, Women of the Sun. Rabbi Kirshbaum has been a welcome addition to our Beth Am Visioning Peace Circle meetings, and I want to thank the Visioning Peace Circle for suggesting, helping to organize this event, and also the staff and leadership of Beth Am. Thank you very much. We've been asked to come here tonight expecting to feel challenged, but also encouraged by what we hear. I know I could use some encouragement tonight. Welcome, Rabbi Kirshbaum.
I have a message at first for any dovrei ivrit and dovrot ivrit. So let me just share that. לכל דוברות עברית או דוברי עברית בקהל הערב רוצה לומר עלינו לשים קץ לטירוף הזה, לעצור את הטירוף. די, מספיק, די. It's up to us to put an end to this insanity. It's up to us to stop this insanity, this tiruf. די, enough. Maspeak, enough. די. The philosopher Martin Buber said, behind every prediction of disaster lies a concealed alternative. And we could talk about that. But where I'd like to begin instead is with a song about Jesus. Isn't it just like a rabbi to begin with a song about Jesus? Actually, it's a song about Adam, Jesus, George Washington, and Franklin Roosevelt. Those are the 4 verses. It was sung by the folk singer Woody Allen, who popularized it in the 1940s. To give you a little context, I'll sing the first verse about Adam before I get to you-know-who. I saw Adam leave the garden with an apple in his hand. I said, now that you're out, what are you gonna do? Plant my crops and pray for rain. Maybe raise a little cane. I'm an orphan now and only passing through. Join me for the chorus. Passing through, sometimes happy, sometimes blue. Glad that I ran into you. Tell the people that you saw me passing through. I saw, Jesus on the cross on a hill called Calvary. I asked, why do men hate you like they do? He said, talk of love, not hate. Things to do, it's getting late. I've so little time, and I'm only passing through. We've so little time, and we're only passing through. So this has become my refrain. And I hope it will explain why you might leave feeling frustrated or even angry with my refusal to field argumentative questions, even though I do know as a rabbi how central argument is to our tradition. Tonight, I'd rather field questions the privilege curiosity above all, and questions that honor the urgency of this moment. We've so little time, and we're only passing through. So now for my plan for this evening. Tonight I want to share 4.5 assumptions, 3 stories, 2 messages, and and 1 very concrete ask, followed by 1 heck of a question and answer session where, based on your questions, I'll share more of the nuts and bolts of women wage peace and what exactly we've been doing with our Palestinian sister movement, Women of the Sun, Isser Shemps. That's earned us, as Meg nicely mentioned, 2 Nobel Peace Prize nominations and prestigious recognition from the Pope in front of an audience of 12,000 in a stadium in Verona, Italy. We were recognized by the Pope. I'll get to that later. From the Pope to Amal and George Clooney, to Hillary and Bill Clinton, although those were separate prizes, they each have their own foundations, to the fashion empress Diane von Furstenberg, to the human rights arm of the EU, known as the European Parliament, to the mayor of Paris, you get the idea, enough name dropping. So I'd like to begin with story number 1, and I'm calling it, Don't Write Us Off as Naive and Overly Idealistic. Don't write us off. In 2018, I represented Women Wage Peace at the 62nd UN Commission on the Status of Women at UN headquarters in New York City. Some of the stories of women who had come from formerly high conflict zones were harrowing. They reminded me of stories told to us in Women Wage Peace by Lema Gboi, our first mentor. Lema began as a Liberian social worker who helped topple the vicious dictatorship of Charles Taylor by uniting Muslim and Christian women, and she certainly didn't do it alone. Eventually, she was a co-recipient of the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize, along with Liberia's first female president, friends of Diane and Paul, who are here tonight, right? Here. Friend, thank you. Friend of yours. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Lema's activism is centered in a documentary called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which chronicles the terrible civil war that tore that country apart, leaving hundreds of thousands dead or displaced. The film reconstructs the way this tragedy galvanizes, absolutely galvanizes, a coalition of Christian and Muslim women to rise up and use nonviolent tactics to put pressure on their government to pursue peace talks, which in turn lead to the election of Liberia's first female president, Sirleaf. Lema shared several stories with us from her time when she worked in the Trauma, Healing, and Reconciliation program in Liberia after the war ended. One was about a woman who came to volunteer there after having to buy back from her son's murderer the hacked pieces of her son's body, piece by piece by piece, so that she could bury him, or rather, his bloody parts. And Lema told us about another woman who was patiently feeding a young man whose arms were stubs. Suddenly, the young man said to the woman who was feeding him, "Don't you recognize me?" And then he said, "Oh, maybe you don't. I was an 8-year-old boy when I murdered your son." The guerrillas shoved a gun into my hands and told me that if I didn't murder your son then and there, my own family would be killed before my eyes. The woman excused herself to go outside, where she quickly vomited. And then she came back in. And Lema saw her coming back in, and Lema said to her, "Maybe you want to serve another patient here." And the woman said, no, I want to go back to feeding him. This is the only way to heal our country. As Israeli women, we are well aware of the human appetite for cruelty. But we are prepared to stand up to it and to say, die, enough, must speak, die, enough. I'd like to go back to a video that at the end shows Lema Gabowi, whom I've just mentioned. It's 41 seconds long. It was made by an Australian broadcasting company called SBS in 2016, October 2016, at our first national event. You'll see at the very end, I took a still picture of it, Lema holding hands with another early member, Lily Weisberger, and we planned this March of Hope, which attracted 30,000 women, 3,000 of whom were from the PA, the Palestinian Authority. We planned it in Lily's kitchen for about a dozen of us. So you'll see Lily standing with Lema at the end. Let me pull it back up here. So, if you can't pick me out, I'm the one wearing white with a blue scarf around my neck. There were 30,000 of us that day. Actually, I can pick myself out, but I know who I was standing with and when this was taken. But now let me show you this video, and if I can, I'd like to, before the video starts, I'd like to show you something, some information about it. Before I full screen it. Just a minute. Okay, so this was not made by us. This was made by SBS. Look down here. Well, you probably can't see it. It's small print and pale ink. But it says 30 M views. It's been seen 30 million times around the world. And this is the Facebook version. It doesn't even account for the version on YouTube, which last time I checked a few years ago had 19 million views. Our message is getting out. Alrighty. Sound. That's it. Whoops. We'll start off with it small, and then hopefully I can enlarge it. Pardon me? No, it's because I have it on. Could you turn it up just a little bit, Susanna?
To make a peace with all the neighbors Jordan, Palestine, Israel, to live together in peace.
There's Lema and there's Lily, in whose kitchen we planned this march. Go on to the next page, and you can. Just a second. Yeah, they're there. All right. But I still owe you 4.5 assumptions that I share with my sisters in Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun, Nisir Shems, plus 2 more stories now, 2 messages, 1 concrete ask, and a question and answer period. So assumption number 1, moving right on. We assume that peace is not a distant dream, but a choice that we make every day. And once you commit to an assumption like that peace is a choice that you make every day, another one quickly follows. It obliges us to leave all shaming and blaming behind. And that's hard work, especially in a conflict like this. And I won't say we've learned to do it. I'll say we're learning to do it. And we succeed more and more. And we notice more and more when we're indulging in shaming and or blaming, and when others are doing it and trying to get something out of us by using the language of shaming and blaming. Assumption number 2 is based for me on a comment I heard years ago by she's mostly known as a writer of children's books, Madeleine L'Engle. Remember A Wrinkle in Time? I once heard her speak at a conference, and she said, "Who ever heard of curling up in bed at night with a good set of facts?" It is story and not fact that is the chief vehicle of truth available to humankind. And then she went on to say, labels make for bad story. And I care about story. So I'd much rather curl up in bed at night with a story. But we get stuck when our stories become our truths, because our stories organize us at a fundamental level. There can't be any change, however, without new stories that break old patterns. And this is hard to do, very hard. My sweet friend Vivian Silver, who was brutally murdered on October 7th, as many of you know, she and I could tell you quite a story about how hard it was for the 2 of us to tell ourselves a new story. I'm trying to tell it to you without her. The story has 3 parts. Part 1. At the end of that long day, our March of Hope, the plan was to go to Jerusalem, where a platform was set up in Balfour Square, outside the Ma'on, the residence of the Prime Minister, who was Bibi Netanyahu at the time, in 2016. And Vivi and I had hoped to meet up, but there were still thousands of us there, not 30,000 in the evening, but thousands of us. But we found each other, and we sit down on the curb, and we listened to one of the speakers. Maybe her name is known to some of you, Hadassah Froman. She is the widow of Menachem Froman, who is a Rav, a rabbi, in the West Bank, in the little settlement of, not so little anymore, of Tekoa, very far east in the territories. And Menachem, her late husband, dedicated himself to coexistence with his Arab neighbors. And Hadassah was speaking to us. And Vivian and I, especially when we had been working on a project like the March of Hope for a while, were in the habit of finishing each other's sentences. So one or the other of us, I don't know which one it was, said, gee, if only Hadassah Froman and her people, the settlers in Tekoa, would, and then the other one of us said, yeah, move back to Israel proper. I don't know which one of us said it, but that's exactly what we were both thinking. And even though we were committed to peace, we didn't at all see settler women as a group that could contribute to peace. And Now we fast forward to the second part of the story. We were, and I suppose still are, I'm not involved in that part of the movement, as we've grown and have more and more specific tasks. But we were always looking for, we call them low barrier activities that people, say, with young children could join, who didn't have the time that retirees had, for instance. And one of those was something that we called Su'ul Shalom, Go in Peace. And what we did was design an app for all 174, I think it was, major intersections in the country for Thursday afternoons. And you could look up whichever intersection is closest to where you were, and you could go there and you could expect that there would be our messaging on big, big cardboard signs from the movement, and you could stand there for as long as you wanted, half an hour or 2 hours. Thursday is, the beginning of the Israeli weekend. A lot of soldiers are coming home for the weekend, a lot of people are traveling around the country, so it was the perfect time. And we do it the second Thursday of every month, something like that. And someone who happened to see us at one intersection, and then a second, and then a third, by the fourth, finally got out of his car. He said, "Who are you?" He explained that he was a Rosh Yeshiva. He was the head of a yeshiva in the West Bank, but he was going up along the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, to go to some family affair. And he said, "I just had to see who you were." And he seemed very excited and very positive about it, which didn't make sense to the women gathered there, since he was from the West Bank. And it turns out that Yaakov Lippi, had a plan for to make peace. That's an interesting one. He got the idea, he says, from the moment when his wife switched cell phone plans, but he realized that they could still communicate with each other. And his plan was, to be very brief, was for one country to overlap the other. And that if you held an Israeli passport, you would pay Israeli taxes and so on and so on. And if you held a Palestinian passport, et cetera, et cetera. He said, we're the startup nation. Why can't we be known for innovative ways to solve this problem? And eventually, he was a guest speaker at something we did outside the Knesset about a year later, when the nation-state law was about to be passed, guaranteeing that Israel would be the nation-state and not just the homeland of the Jewish people. And we set up a tent outside the Knesset, and he came to speak there. And he told us that his parents were Romanian immigrants in the 1920s to Palestine in those days. And that his parents were quite religious and expected to, be able to continue their practice, all the more so in Palestine. But when the ship docked in Haifa, they wouldn't get off the boat, his parents, because they saw, a sort of proto-city then. It was the 1920s, but they saw something that his parents didn't expect at all, and they refused to get off the boat. They thought that the captain had tricked them and taken them to Beirut, and they wouldn't get off. Because to them, that wasn't Israel. But eventually they were removed from the boat, and they went to where they intended to go, which was what we now know as the West Bank, the territories of the Geddah. And Yaakov grew up there. He didn't come after 67. He grew up there. And he would say to us, Ani lo kovesh, I'm not an occupier. Aval ani gar betoch am mechubash. I'm not an occupier, but I live among an occupied people. when Viv and I heard him explain his deep attachment to the land and his family's deep attachment to that part of the land, and their, to use an odd word for a rabbi, their religious connection to that part of the land, and not to the seacoast, not to Haifa and Tel Aviv and Ashkelon and so forth. That to them is where we became a people. The first part of the Tanakh, the first part of the Bible, the Torah, that's all myth. But where we really became a people was there in so many ways. And Vivian and I had, and many others, had to take this all in. But eventually we understood that those settler women, those mitnachlot, who were interested in coexistence, no matter what the final result would look like, were far from our enemies. They weren't only our allies, they were the women with the most at stake. They wanted to stay there because they loved that land, and that land feels like not just home to them, but home to the Jewish people in ways that it's very hard for us coastal types, I guess in either country, to understand. And boy, that was hard. That was so, so, so hard for us. I mean, we had each other, but that was so hard for us to change our story. And over the years, we've done as much as we can with mitnachlot, with settler women who are committed to coexistence. All right, story. Oh, no, I'm ready to show you the next clip, which is which shows the daughter-in-law of the woman who was speaking at our big March of Hope when Vivian and I said, oh, we should move back to Israel proper. I go into some detail about Michal, her daughter-in-law, because Michal, before, maybe a year or so before, when you're going to see her in this video, was stabbed while pregnant, while she was in the used clothing community building out in Tekoa. But she lived, the baby lived, and it was a gemach she was in. But here she is speaking on our behalf. She's a member of Women Wage Peace. You'll see her with her own blue scarf and blue kova. Yeah, let me just play it. What you see in the background might look like something odd in the vicinity of the Gaza border, but it's a tel. It's known as Tel Gamma. So it's a human-made mound. And it had been burned by, I think I put something, yeah. This is Michal, who had been stabbed, a resident of Tekoa, a West Bank settlement, during a Women Wage Peace event at an archaeological site, Tel Gamma, near the Gaza border, that was scorched by incendiary balloons, maybe you remember those, released by Hamas in June of 2018. So much, much, much farmland in that area was scorched. All right, let me turn this on.
כשצופים במשחק כדורגל, כדי ליהנות באמת מהמשחק צריך לבחור בעד איזו קבוצה אתה. כשמצפים לשלום, כשכמהים לשלום, אפשר וצריך להיות בעד שני הצדדים. הלב מסוגל לחבק את תושבי עוטף עזה בימים הקשים והשחורים האלה, ועם זאת לכאוב את המצוקה הקשה של האוכלוסייה ברצועה. די. אי
אפשר יותר.
This is Vivian.
אי אפשר להמשיך יותר בלי אופק מדיני. אי אפשר לקבל כשגרה מבצעים ומלחמות שמביאים רק הרג.
תעשו למעננו כל מה שאפשר. I hear every single day it's complicated. It's in fact so complicated we can think of nothing, we can do nothing. But looking at all of you and hearing and feeling what it is possible to do, when people say it is complicated and we're here, and we will not accept the status quo.
במבצעים עברנו כאן, עד שנדמה שזוהי גזירת גורל שאין דרך להיחלץ ממנה. אבל אלה הם מעשי אדם.
הילד שלי כבר איננו. הילד שלכם, הנכד שלכם, הוא זה שילחם במלחמה הבאה. מלחמה שלא תביא ביטחון. צריך להסתכל על המציאות בעיניים. רק פתרון מדיני יביא ביטחון לדרום מדינת ישראל. עם כל הכאב, עם כל הקושי, רק פתרון מדיני הוא התשובה.
Okay. On to assumption number 3, in case you were keeping track. Our third assumption is that no conflict is so unique that it can't be solved. And no people is so unique and chosen that its problems are entirely unique. And here's the corollary. Neither Israelis nor Palestinians, as you well know, have a monopoly on decency or on cruelty. And here's assumption 3A. That's why I said I had 4.5 assumptions. I got to meet in Vienna one year, on behalf of the movement, a Dr. Suzanne Yalka. She herself was a psychoanalyst. What else are you in Vienna? And her father had numbered Freud among his students. But in her retirement, she started something called Konfliktkultur, conflict culture. And I'm going to paraphrase her, the risk of oversimplifying, but I want to move quickly on. Conflicts aren't really for solving. Conflicts aren't for solving. And they're not even for resolving or re-solving. They're for transforming into nonviolent expressions of themselves. Because you know what? The underlying tensions are usually fruitful ones. Not the conflict, but the underlying tensions that are built into most things in life are usually fruitful. And I can go into that more in the Q&A. I think this assumption can help us appreciate the insight of the 19th century British historian Trollope, as channeled by the New Yorker contributor Adam Gopnik. Gopnik wrote, "Here's how, according to Trollope, political reform happens. An impossible idea becomes possible. Then it becomes necessary. And then all but a handful of diehards accept its inevitability." And Trollope was probably writing about the slave trade in Britain. And Gopnik continues, "The job of those trying to bring about change is not to hector it into the agenda of the necessary, but to move it into the realm of the plausible. Once something is plausible, even in a semi-democratic society, it has a natural momentum toward becoming real. A few months before the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland in 1998, 27 years ago, a survey conducted by Northern Ireland's major daily newspaper, the Belfast Telegraph, found that over 90% of both Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland supported in principle a negotiated agreement. But less than 30% agreed that the talks would actually lead to one. They didn't think it was possible. Indeed, 3 days before the Good Friday Agreement was signed, 86% of Northern Irelanders believed that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would be resolved long before their own conflict. And that was 3 days before the signing. It's the women of Northern Ireland who are widely credited with planting the seeds for this historic agreement, the Good Friday Agreement. They were the ones who had the courage to unite Catholics and Protestants. They had the vision and persistence in the face of ongoing violence to make an impossible idea possible, then necessary, and then inevitable. In this last clip, you'll see the Irish ambassador to Israel, she was the ambassador in 2023, the Honorable Sonia McGuinness. We have an active relationship with nearly every embassy in Jerusalem and their staff. Go into that in Q&A. At any rate, you'll see her speaking. She's from the Republic of Ireland, but they were the ones who generously enabled us to send a delegation of our women to Northern Ireland to learn from the women who built the mutual trust that led in large part to the Good Friday Agreement. We went to learn from them. How did they do it? And we learned a lot. I would have to say we're still reaping the benefit of that very generous offer to take bring a delegation of our women to Northern Ireland. So here's that. Whoops. Oh, there it is. Okay, the name of this little clip is called We Must End This Madness. עלינו לעצור את הטירוף הזה.
הזעקה משותפת חייבת להתחזק ולהתרחב.
That's why, as hard as it is, we must keep pursuing peace. We must keep pursuing the path so that Israel and the Palestinian people can both live safely, in security, in dignity, and in peace.
Now, I want to pause here, even before I tell the next story, because you've seen the word mothers come up. And because you're Americans, I want to say, and you might be put off by that term, we don't mean it in the biological sense when we use the word. We mean it in a metaphorical sense. We understand that our part of the world is on fire. And it's hurting. And we're all hurting. And we think that the gesture that's needed, first of all, is to put our arms around it. So in that sense, I invite you to think of yourself as a mother. Also, when you think about it, where there are women, there's a new life. And without them, there just ain't. All right, by the way, the second story, I forgot to give the name of it. I called it the three-part story about Yaakov Levi and Vivian and I changing our minds. The second story I called Don't Write Anyone Off as a Potential Partner. Not a single soul. The third story I'm calling Your Monkeys. Long Live King Bibi. So I was at one of our Thursday Se'ula Shalom events in Beersheba, outside the big BIG shopping center. And we knew we'd get lots of traffic there. And we were holding up our usual signs. And I happened to be holding the one that said, Hashalom hu bitachon. Peace is security. It was real big. Your arms got tired in no time from holding this up. You tried to find a parking meter or something you could rest it on, because it was big. And I happened to be holding that one, and there were 5, 6, 7 other women holding some of our other messaging, and we got mostly friendly honks, as we usually did. And then a group of young women started walking towards us, and I'm sure the other women I was standing with thought the same thing that I did. Oh, good, young women. Would draw them in. And they were carrying shopping bags. They had clearly gone clothes shopping in some of the more fashionable stores in Big, in the shopping center. But as they came closer, I could see that the one in the lead, her eyes were narrowing. And she came up and she stood right in front of me, with her eyes narrowed, and she spat at me. Unfortunately, I put the sign up so that I wasn't hit with her spit. And then she screamed at all of us, and then she was joined by the other two. And she screamed at us in technically ungrammatical Hebrew, because she used the masculine plural form. She said, Atem kofim! You're monkeys, you're apes. She didn't even say Atem kofot, in the feminine. She said, Atem, you, in the masculine, they were all women. Atem kofim! Bibi HaMelech, Chai V'Kayam. You know that phrase from David Melech, Israel, Chai V'Kayam. Bibi HaMelech, Chai V'Kayam. Bibi HaMelech Chai. Atem kofim. And then they walked on. So here's the fourth assumption. I'll get back to the story at the end of it. We assume that, thank you, the mind reader, you. Pays to know the right people around here. We assume that a gendered lens is a very useful lens through which to look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In fact, our own theory of change is based on this idea that someone needs to be looking through a gendered lens. Not everyone. Each peace group has its own theory of change, as well it should, but ours is to offer a view through a gendered lens. How do we defend our choice to use such a lens? First, we don't rely on what's called gender essentialism, the idea that women are essentially X and men are essentially Y. We don't rely on that because we don't believe it. It's nonsense. We base our activism instead on the work of our dear mentor, and she's not listening live, watching live, but I know I just was in touch with her the other day, and I know she'll be watching. And Carol, we are so indebted to you. So we base our activism on the work of our dear mentor, renowned psychologist Carol Gilligan. I'm finishing by me saying she was born Carol Friedman, and she became bat mitzvah on the very first anniversary of Israel's Independence Day. And where were people doing that in 1949? At the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, up on the Upper West Side. Carol Gilligan revolutionized the study of ethics by describing an ethics of care that can be as powerful a motivator of human behavior as the ethics of justice. And she taught us to notice that while the ethic of justice asks, what is the right thing to do? What is the just thing to do? The ethics of care asks, how should I respond? She's helped us immeasurably to understand what happens to the human voice. Not the voice of women, but the human voice in a thickly patriarchal society. The human voice becomes the voice of women. This is the voice that says what it sees and doesn't speak in euphemisms. This is the voice that knows deep down how interconnected and interdependent all of life is. The voice that concedes the need for excruciating compromise at times. And this turns out, as I was saying, to be a human voice. So why has it become the domain of women in a thickly patriarchal culture? I think for a relatively simple but not so obvious reason that it took Carol to point out to the world. And this version of it was shared with me at a talk I gave early on at Emory University. Someone in the audience got up and said, Rabbi, I think I know what you're saying. And the woman in the audience said, little boys, aren't they, are expected to man up by around age 4 or 5. They have to give up playing with Barbies and enjoying being tucked in with lullabies and that kind of thing. They're expected to man up by around age 4 or 5. Girls are not expected to shut up until around age 14 or 15. And by virtue of those precious 10 years in which the very human language of relationship can grow naturally, many, but certainly not all girls, come into adulthood better equipped to use that human language to solve problems. But there's also a great awareness of how coded life becomes, to the point where, as you may have read yourself in Carol's first book, In a Different Voice, I think it was published in 1984, she was interviewing a woman, and the woman interrupted her and said, do you want to know what to Carol, she said, do you want to know what I think? Or do you want to know what I really think? But tragically, the story doesn't end there. On the whole, we older women don't go out of our way to encourage teenage girls and young women to resist the demands of patriarchy, to compartmentalize, to compete to the point where national conflicts turn into zero-sum games. To speak in, I would call it a desperate jargon in which attackers are, for instance, neutralized, not killed. Neutralized. We adult women often buy into its most harmful messages, as illustrated by the, albeit young woman, but still a grown woman, who tried to spit on me for holding up a sign that said, "Peace is security." So how do we reach young women with our message that peace is not only possible, but that peaceful coexistence is the most desirable outcome? I'll save that for the Q&A, what we've been doing. Now on to my two messages. They're very brief. If you're wondering why I haven't mentioned justice, we see, as most peacemaking groups in the world do, maybe all, that peace is the prerequisite for justice. That justice is the very soul of peaceful coexistence. But there has to be a cessation of hostility that you can trust first. So of course we're interested in justice, that goes without saying, but we understand that it comes after we've gotten up to rock bottom. And my second message is, peace is possible when women lead the way at this point in human history. And then I have one very concrete ask. Don't underestimate us. Join us. And you can do that in a very concrete way right now, or at least you can hear about it, know about it, and then act on it if you like. In keeping with the sense that we live in a deeply, deeply wounded, we Israelis, in a deeply wounded part of the world, and to our great good fortune, we were joined by our Palestinian sisters formally in March of 2022, right after they got NGO status in the PA. And we had a big celebration on the Dead Sea, part of the Dead Sea, where they could come freely without a permit. We could join them there. Of course, we could go anywhere in the Geda, the West Bank. And here we are, signing our declaration. These are 4 women of Nisei Hashem's, women of the sun, and this is Rim Al-Hajjari, and it's really, she's the leader, but works with a wonderful group. And these are some of our leaders. And I know these look like Ukrainian flags, but that's the color of Women of the Sun. And that's why they're wearing yellow scarves. And we're wearing turquoise scarves. So what I have here is a barcode. And you can hold your phone up to it, and it will take you, make it a little bit smaller. It will take you to our Mother's Call. And that's what the Pope signed so publicly in Verona last year in front of a crowd, audience of about 12,000. He signed our Mother's Call, as have many others, many, many others. Another way to get there is https://mothers, no apostrophe, mothers-call.org, and then the Mother's Call. I'm going to go there now. Okay. And there you'll see the gist of it, and you can sign it here. And there's the whole thing, there's the whole text. And this is a little video, I won't share it now, about that day in March of 2022. But here's the whole text, and here's the gist of it, and here's where you can sign it. So it's, or you can just use mothers-call.org. And it has its own website now. It's ours, but we decided to give it its own website. We consider ourselves a resistance movement, not a protest movement, although we certainly are taking part in the protests that went on today in Jerusalem. I understand there were 100,000 there. We're a resistance movement. I can go into the difference also in the Q&A. But I thought I'd close with this sign carried by a Palestinian Israeli woman saying, "Die, enough." We've resurrected this idea of garnering support from outside Israel and Palestine. It's clear to us that we can't carry this load all the way, and we need your help. One idea that's come up, for instance, and this time around, we have very dynamic, two very dynamic leaders, actually, for this new worldwide supporters group. And one idea that a group has already proposed is to take Mother's Day and use it as a time to get people to sign the Mother's Call. Because originally, when it was written by, I can't think of her first two names, Howe, the woman who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic, it was written a few years after the end of the Civil War. And it was written, her idea of Mother's Day would be a day to resist war as an answer to our problems. And it's stirring what she wrote. So I think many of our groups are going to do that. And we'll be starting the Baltimore group in about a month. So if you want to leave your email there, I'll get in touch with you when we do. And one thing that makes so much sense this time around, when we first did this, in 2015, 16, and so forth, we sort of expected our support groups to just shadow what we were doing in Israel, so that when we had our big marches, which we don't need to do anymore because we're better known, we don't need so much theater. But when we did that, for instance, we had a group marching across the Golden Gate Bridge. We had a group marching around the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, and they sort of shadowed what we were doing. But now we understand that each group should be doing the things that are most suitable to their own locale and to their own group of women. It shouldn't be cookie cutter at all. So our Baltimore group will be different from the Washington, D.C. group and so on and so on. And we'll keep the tasks, all different sizes for people at all different stages of life.
Well, thank you for your presentation. This may be a question that's out of bounds, and please just say so if it is. But there are so many events that happen, the purpose of which is to blame and shame, often involving both parties to a conflict. Each one is there to blame and shame the other.
You bet.
And I guess my question is, as an organization that appreciates the futility of those kinds of activities, is it useful to just stay away from them, or is there a way to engage them so that they shift their focus? Because what is your experience in how to deal with the plethora of shame and blame activities that sort of occupy most of the theater?
A great question, and I don't mean to be glib, but we're so busy advancing what we do that we don't tend to engage. I'm not sure that we have, a particular way, but I think many of us who have been around for a while have a better ear now for when that's beginning to happen. or when what seems like a well-intentioned question or comment is on its way to blaming or shaming. But I was tempted to take out my phone and just show you my WhatsApps from today. I usually get about 30 or 40 of them from these different teams, and of course right now because of a new crisis. But we're so active. That's what I was looking for. I was just going to quickly run through a list of what we're up to at the moment. Here. I'm trying to keep it very short. So short that now I can't find it. But you see, our approach is both bottom-up and top-down. So that we're very much a grassroots organization, but we also aim for a connection to the highest sources of power. And we used to, for instance, go to the Monday plenum gatherings and sit up in the peanut gallery with our scarves and our white shirts. And the Knesset met as a plenum. But then we realized that, it had very little symbolic value. And our time was better spent in cultivating relationships with individual MKs, members of Knesset. And also, we had a bill that was this close to being passed in the Lapid coalition, the so-called Coalition of Hope. He succeeded Bennett. And it had gone through all the committees it needed to go through and was just about ready to be voted on. And we had support from Shas on one end, a very religious party, and Chadash on the other, a mostly Arab party, also known as the Communist Party. And we had support from everybody in between. And we called this bill Chalufot Mediniyot Batchila, political or diplomatic alternatives first. Because it's been the case that when there's an event that involves the border police, it quickly escalates. And then it goes to the political security cabinet, sort of like the U.S. National Security Council. It goes to the political security cabinet, and that's made up of retired generals. And, it mostly escalates when it reaches that point. So this bill would provide a permanent budget allocation for a council of citizens with all populations equitably represented, including women in various cohorts, to meet with the political security cabinet to see if a situation can be de-escalated first. With the understanding that there are times when it has to be escalated militarily, but not as many as happens. And we have some other ideas for legislation as well. So on the grassroots level, we have regional teams, and they're doing all kinds of projects like making sure that enough Jewish members are going to the iftar every night during Ramadan. And on the other hand, we have the international relations team is meeting diplomats both in Israel and all over, wherever we can get an introduction, to tell them about our program. We have a legislative group. We have a separate a team called 1325 after the UN resolution of the year 2000, UN Security Council resolution number 1325, mandating the equal representation of women in all matters of peacemaking and peace building and peacekeeping. And that's a very active group, and everything in between. And we're just doing, and then on top of that, we're showing up at the protests, and of course we're there for the hostage families every night. We haven't missed a night. I don't mean every weekend, but but every night. We've never missed a night. As I say, we're no longer doing these big events, although we did have on October 3rd and 4th, 2023, a regional conference in East Jerusalem. 1,500 Israelis and Palestinian women and women from the neighborhood, from the region, came. One of the most exciting things that's happening, I feel, I'm sure many others do too, is that to address the current crisis in Israeli politics, we're part of something called Kabinet Hanashim, the Women's Cabinet. And maybe I will, on my phone, I had the poster for it. So all kinds of new women's groups have sprung up ever since, before October 7th, when we had the change of government starting in November 2022. There's Ima Era, Mothers Waking Up. There's, I had all the names in my phone. I'm not even up on all of them. There's Imahot, Mothers. There are about 5 or 6 groups on this poster, besides us. And for us, of course, our attitude is the more the merrier. Each one has a slightly different theory of change, and that's good. That's all to the good. So we're doing that, and we were, I think, about 2 months shy of finishing a MEPA grant, Middle East Peace Partnership grant, from USAID. And our funds are frozen so far. We were going to have a peak event at the end of it, but we haven't made payroll for a while. And that took something we did years ago called the Map of Opportunities, 10 different categories of ways that various affinity groups and professions and so on could be making peace each and every day, could choose to make peace each and every day. And the 2 groups that we chose from that for this grant were religious leaders, women religious leaders, and women environmental leaders in both Israel and the PA, and the Palestinian Authority. And the plan was to get them to make peace part of their agenda, and the peace dividend, so-called, part of their agenda. And Vivian and I, and others, Abe, if you're watching, no, it's after midnight, I forgot, worked on this, and on our 4th try, it was accepted. But USAID was great. They worked with us until we got it really the most useful, as useful as we could make it. So there's that, and that, that was something that a lot of our women were involved in. And there are all kinds of projects that we're doing, both from the local level up to the international level, all the time. It's a bit dizzying. I'm sorry I can't find that exact list. Yes?
So, thank you, and it is impressive to listen to your dedication to continuing to do this. But I guess what frustrates me or worries me is it feels as if in Israel and in the American Jewish community, fewer and fewer people actually believe in a peaceful solution any longer. Yeah, I think about when I lived in Israel, there's a lot of optimism. It feels like it's gone. And I wonder, do you really believe that this, it feels like there has to be some catalyst to change this. And I guess, do you really believe that what you're doing is a sufficient catalyst? Or do we have to find some other way to catalyze change? It doesn't feel like it's improving. It feels like it's getting worse.
Yes. Yes to a lot of things you said, but we have an expression that we stick to absolutely. אין לנו את הלוקסוס להתייאש. We don't have the luxury to despair. That's a luxury Israelis and Palestinians can't afford. And the fact that we've been, not to beat a dead horse, but twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize is not nothing. Mm-hmm. And the fact that our legislation is ready to go once there's change in government. But it's ready. And the fact that there are 5 or 6 new women's movements also using this metaphor of motherhood, many of them, not all of them, but many of them. One of them was called Pink. I can't think of the last word I have on the phone. So much is happening. So much is happening. But you have to have the eyes to see it. And for that, you need the sense that despair is a luxury we can't afford. So much is happening. And when it will sort of combust, I can't tell you, but clearly, as it did in Northern Ireland and other conflicts we've studied, it takes a lot of years of this grassroots work. George Mitchell, on the signing of the Good Friday Accords in 1998, said, if all of the P2P, people-to-people projects, hadn't planted seeds in the very hard soil of Northern Ireland, or words to that effect, it's not an exact quote, we diplomats never could have done what we've done here today. But it took years. And we understand that we're not in a sprint. This is a marathon. And we keep at it, and we keep expanding. Right now, a big push for us is to get some really viable worldwide support groups going, because we need pressure from the outside. We need women writing op-eds, and engaging diplomats and the diplomatic corps in various countries to hear our message, to help us push from the outside. Meg?
I know you said that in your view justice comes after peace. I'm curious what you think about forgiveness, and I'll just say I had a very close Bosnian friend in the early 2000s, and we were friends maybe 6 years after the peace treaty, and I remember her telling me that she could never ever forgive the Serbians and anyone from Serbia, and I was like, well, does that mean you don't support the peace? And she said, no, I completely support the peace treaty, but I can never ever forgive them for what happened to men in her family.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I happen to have written something about that.
Oh, okay.
And I left a few copies of this. It's something I wrote just after the Tsukitan, the 50-day Gaza War of 2014. It's on the movement website. One second. It's about the need to meet the pain and not suppress it. And we have all kinds of programs to do that, even as it's ongoing. All kinds of programs. Many women in our movement, I wrote this in 2015, many women in our movement have already devoted themselves to the how of achieving, that's not it. Sorry, I can't find it right now, but if you take a copy of this, it's in there. That's very important to us. And it can't always be, at first we were doing this in a sort of formal way, and we had sessions where we would arrange chairs across from each other, and we would sit and look into each other's eyes. And, very simple stuff like that. But And many pairs would begin to cry spontaneously. But now we're busy in other ways, but it doesn't mean that we've forgotten for a minute about finding ways to share our pain with one another. Yes. Is it all right if we go on? Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Are you saying that peace is a choice we make by doing before we believe? Like, how do we get ourselves and other people to believe that peace is possible? Because it seems like the things you're doing are like you're cultivating peace and planting that before it's happening on a national
Macro
scale. But
you know, I don't mean to be too rabbinic, despite the temptation, but I really think just in your asking the question, you have already started to answer it for yourself. I really, really do. It's that speaking of the question out loud, I think, is the first step for many of us. And actually hearing ourselves say it out loud. Without the hand-wringing, oh, what can I do? And so forth. But just to hear ourselves say it with real concern, with real authenticity. And I guarantee you that the answer will keep growing for you. I wrote, remember how the distraught mother of Moses fashions a tiny ark out of the most common of materials, reeds growing along the Nile River, a little tar, a little pitch, to make the basket waterproof. And then she sets it by the riverbank with her precious son inside it. She chooses to act despite legitimate fear and suspicion, borne out by the history of her people and the realities of her own life under a tyrant, Pharaoh, who deeply desires her people's destruction. Her use of conventional raw material in an unconventional way illustrates for me Martin Buber's observation that behind every prediction of disaster lies a concealed alternative. One could also dwell on the story's use of irony. An Egyptian princess, after all, Egyptian princess, saves the life of Moses and thus contributes to the rescue of Moses' people. But we in Women Wage Peace have other urgent work to do, creating new language, a language beyond shaming and blaming, and creating expectations of normalcy, despite our having so little with which to work. And with the winds of war still hovering, we must do so chick-chuck right away. Esther, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about membership in Women Wage Peace of Mizrahi women and Ethiopian Jewish women, specifically because in Israel as well as here, the far right has made inroads among people of color and women of color, and it's very easy to reach for racist explanations. But kind of to your point about young women, women of color, I feel like there is in here, feel as though peace agreements are going to be made might be made at their expense. I've seen pictures of the hostages, and I noticed that they don't look like most people. They don't look like most people in this room, and that hasn't escaped my notice. So I'm asking about the kind of, they're the ones that need to be, or the ability to convince them is the stability of this coalition.
Which coalition?
Of women wage, of the project of women wage peace and
Yes and no. I don't mean to say that, oh, we're colorblind, that kind of thing. We've had robust outreach to the Ethiopian community, to the Russian, so-called Russian community, in the area especially of Beth Am, but elsewhere, to all kinds of communities. Those are the very populations that we demand, whose voices we demand are heard in this legislation we expect to pass soon. So that every cohort, every population, but by its own definition of what that consists of, has a voice in making decisions that affect national security. And I can't say that those groups are really robust right now because we're so busy with, just the daily crisis, each daily crisis. But that's always been important, that we don't all look like me. At the same time, but the no part of yes and no is that we understand, and I learn not to apologize for my relative financial security and my education and so forth and so on, but to exploit the heck out of it and to use it as best I can. And also, being an Ola, being an immigrant to Israel, I realized that I have something precious. And at first I would almost sort of excuse myself, and I'd always try to use, before I was speaking Hebrew well, the fanciest, most flowery phrase I could, like even in the Rite Aid, or the Ace Hardware, I would say, when they try to answer me in English, I'd say, אני מעדיפה להתמודד בעברית. It's very lofty. I prefer to struggle with Hebrew, but this word struggle is very high. No, thank you. I prefer to struggle. But I stopped apologizing. I come with a gift, the gift of having grown up in a fairly stable democracy. I'm talking about the 1950s and 60s. That's a gift. What Mizrahi woman whose family has come from, the Maghreb or from Iran or Iraq and Yemen and so forth, what experience have they had with democracy? So that's the no part. So, I try to really exploit what I have, what I come with, and not excuse the fact that I have these privileges. They can only help us as we move towards another conception of democracy. And for that, we lean on Carol Gilligan as well. She sees democracy as the liberation of the liberation from democracy, the liberating of democracy from patriarchy. And she compares democracy to love. In order for a love relationship to work, you need equal voice. And you need, there are two other things. I think I have it here. And you need people who can spot false authority. And you need people who have a desire to live in relationship. She finds that true of democracy and of love. Democracy rests on the presumption of equal voice, she says. In contrast, patriarchy seems to exalt the autonomous individual, but privileges some individuals, males over females, and then certain males over other males, with one pater, one father above all. But in fact, patriarchy does not exalt the individual. It isolates him. In extremist movements gripping the Middle East, all patriarchal by this definition, abnegation of selfhood has itself become a holy task. Yet because patriarchy is based on a denial of the self, it's inherently unstable. And that's what we're seeing now. So it always has to defend itself in a way that we understand we can move beyond. But it's our job to bring these ideas into the realm of the possible. Never mind the necessary. Never mind the inevitable. We'll get there. I'll answer your question.
So let me just take a very quick moment to say Toda Rabbah once again to Rabbi Donna Kirshbaum. Donna, you're a treasure, and I just want to say how grateful I am to call you a colleague and teacher, and thank you for really an inspiring, uplifting, and deeply challenging presentation this evening. Yeah. I'm thinking about leadership and what an exemplar of leadership you are. And I think of a phrase from Pirkei Avot, ironically, you'll see why, of course, in a moment, that I come to often when I think about leadership, and that is the line, "B'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel liot ish," which literally translates, "In a place where there's a dearth of men, strive to be a man." And I think I want to amend that statement this evening to say we really learn from your example, "B'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel liot isha." In a place where there's a dearth of men, strive to be a woman. So thank you, and thanks everybody for coming tonight.